but there will certainly be some around and it'll be breezy.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Hello and welcome to The Briefing with me, Gloria De Piero. Lots coming up today, starting with the very latest on the growing Christmas parties row. We've 3 MPs in the studio today, and we're talking trophy hunting, how we help our high streets, and how we go greener quicker. And we've an exclusive interview with the flamboyant Conservative MP, Michael Fabricant. But first, here's the news.
I'm Olivia Guthrie. This is your news at 12 o'clock. The Cabinet Secretary will now investigate 3 alleged parties in Downing Street and Whitehall during lockdown last year. During urgent questions in the House of Commons, Cabinet Minister Michael Ellis says they're looking into several claims. It comes after a leaked video showing Number 10 staff laughing about restrictions following an alleged Downing Street party, which forced the resignation of government aide Allegra Stratton. Here's what Paymaster General Michael Ellis had to say in the Commons earlier.
Now, I can confirm to the House that the Cabinet Secretary's investigation will establish the facts surrounding the following. Allegations made of a gathering at Number 10 Downing Street on the 27th of November 2020, a gathering at the Department for Education on the 10th of December 2020, and allegations made of a gathering at Number 10 Downing Street on the 18th of December 2020.
Meanwhile, Boris Johnson is facing a revolt from Tory backbenchers who are questioning the government's credibility in enforcing England's Plan B COVID rules. The backlash from the Prime Minister's party comes amid allegations of a Downing Street Christmas party last year. New rules include extending mandatory masks to indoor public venues such as cinemas and theatres, and guidance to work from home where possible will return on Monday. Mr Johnson has denied bringing forward announcements to divert attention from the row.
Just as the 1922 committee, way back in the 1990s, saw Margaret Thatcher, we never thought that the Iron Lady would ever be forced to resign from the premiership, but she was. So basically, we're in a situation here, even though Boris has a massive Commons majority, at some point or other, the backbenchers' rebellion could be at such a stage that the Tory party decides there's only one way forward, and that's replace the leader.
Dominic Raab and Grant Shapps are self-isolating after being in contact with Australian Deputy Prime Minister, who's since tested positive for coronavirus. Barnaby Joyce confirmed the news while travelling in Washington, D.C. The ministers had both met Mr Joyce when he was in London earlier in the week. Scottish Conservative leader Douglas Ross is also self-isolating after a member of his staff tested positive for COVID. Boris Johnson is facing renewed questions into a donation used to pay for the redecoration of his Downing Street flat. Deputy Labour leader Angela Rayner has accused the Prime Minister of lying when he said he didn't know who was behind the payment. The Electoral Commission says the Conservative Party failed to accurately report a donation and keep a proper accounting record. It's fined the Tories £17,800. A party spokesman said they're considering an appeal. Nearly 1 in 4 people celebrating Christmas will struggle to afford it this year. That's according to research from a national debt charity. Step Change found that 1 in 12 will borrow to pay for festive spending, with a quarter taking a year or more to pay the money back. Those who are borrowing say rising household costs, reduced income, and the recent loss of the temporary uplift to universal credit are among the reasons. The aircraft carrier HMS Queen Elizabeth is returning home today following the loss of a £100 million fighter jet at sea. The Royal Navy flagship had originally been expected to return to Portsmouth tomorrow, but that was brought forward due to concerns about the weather. In November, an F-35B Lightning jet crashed into the Mediterranean after tumbling off the deck. The pilot escaped unharmed. A member of the carrier's crew has been arrested on suspicion of leaking video footage of the incident. And Boris Johnson and his wife Carrie have announced the birth of a baby girl at a London hospital earlier today. It's the couple's second child after the birth of their son Wilfred in April 2020. A spokeswoman for the couple said both mother and daughter are doing very well. That's all your news for now. I'll have more in half an hour. Back to the briefing with Gloria.
Coming up this hour on The Briefing, we've the latest from number 10. The Christmas party row is worsening. COVID curbs are back in England. And the Prime Minister's wife has just had a baby. We call ourselves a nation of animal lovers, yet some people get their kicks from killing big animals and bringing the spoils home. We're talking to the MP trying to ban trophy hunting imports. And they've long been the vibrant heart of our towns, but our high streets are struggling, and the pandemic has made matters even worse. I'm talking to a Conservative MP about how we can help our high streets and local communities to thrive. And there's a few characters in politics, and then there's Conservative MP for Lichfield, Michael Fabricant. I have an exclusive interview that, trust me, you're really going to enjoy. First, there's terrible headlines for number 10 today after the Prime Minister imposed Plan B COVID restrictions on England. And yesterday, a senior aide resigned after seeming to joke about an alleged Downing Street party last Christmas in breach of lockdown rules. Now, other reported parties are being investigated too. Our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, is in Downing Street. Darren, what's the latest?
Well, first of all, we know that Simon Case's, the Cabinet Secretary's remit, Gloria, has now been extended beyond simply that party on December 18th, the infamous one, of course, where that leaked video was referring to, and to 2 other parties, one at the Department of Education, which is essentially all but owned up to having a gathering involving drinks, and the then Secretary of State for Education, Gavin Williamson, at the time. And then a further party that we have got details of that may well have taken place on the 27th of November inside Downing Street. However, it doesn't include allegations about another one inside the Prime Minister's flat itself, allegedly hosted by Carrie Symonds on the 13th of November, that Dominic Cummings, must be said, is tweeting everyone who will listen to him, saying that that is the one that everyone should be looking at. So the remit's been extended. Clearly, as always with these stories, Often it prompts more questions than answers when these investigations begin. Downing Street attempts hoping that it would go away. Well, that's not going to happen, but I think they have taken some of the heat out of the situation. Labour, without urgent question today, though, still trying to pile on the pressure. The problem for the government is that there are a lot of Conservative MPs who are frankly quite angry about all of this, that the government have yet again got themselves into a complete and utter mess in regards to this, a bit of an own goal, that it's clearly doing damage with the government's credibility when it comes to the public. You add on to that, Gloria, the lockdown sceptics in the Conservative Party who are fuming over this idea of COVID passports potentially coming into play next week, and even talk about mandatory vaccines. They are royally annoyed about that. You put those two forces together and the party is pretty disgruntled with their leader right now, and that is politically tricky for Boris Johnson. As you say, look at the front pages of the newspapers today. They do not make great reading for him either. And on top of all of that, we've also had the announcement of the investigation into the Downing Street flat, his wallpaper. Do you remember that very famous wallpaper about 6 months ago? Well, the Conservative Party is going to be fined £18,000 for not following the rules properly and declarations around that. But there are still further questions about when the Prime Minister knew about who potentially was funding that flat. So you add all this together, it's really politically tricky for Boris Johnson right now. If there is one bit of good news, is that he's become a dad today. In fact, he's just, Gloria, arrived back in Downing Street from the hospital in North London, where Carrie Johnson gave birth to a baby at 7:40 a.m. this morning, becoming a dad with Carrie for the second time and a dad for the seventh time. So Boris Johnson at least has good news today that he has once again become a father.
Darren, McCaffrey, thank you. Thanks very much indeed. Now, it's a strange way to get your kicks, killing lions and other big animals for fun. And the government pledged in 2019 to ban hunters bringing their spoils into the UK. It hasn't happened yet, though. And Labour MP for Warley, John SPELLAR, is trying to get this into law via his private member's bill, which has its second reading in Parliament tomorrow. I'm delighted that he's with me in the studio now. John, thank you for coming in.
Pleasure, Gloria.
Before we talk about your moves on trophy hunting, can I just ask you about vaccine passports? Lots of Conservative MPs are worried about their introduction. Where do you stand on vaccine passports?
Well, I think what we're seeing from the government is sort of knee-jerk reactions all the time, and there needs to be a strategy. And part of that strategy has to be to keep the economy going, and that includes, obviously, the leisure economy, which is a huge part of it. And that may mean, and I've been saying this all year, may mean vaccine passports. I always carry mine with me. Vaccine passports to make sure that people going there can be reasonably safe. And we've got to actually get to risk management rather than risk avoidance. And I would say to those MPs on the other side who are expressing concerns, and that reflects some concerns in amongst the public, look, how else are you going to keep these industries going? How else are you going to keep these businesses going? Because many of them are on the brink. And if it keeps being stop-start, I think many of them will go under. I think we lose a lot in our society, but it's a huge number of jobs, and I'm really worried about jobs.
Let's talk about your private members' bills. So hunters can import trophies of animals, including polar bears and reindeer, under a limited number of government licences, but not ivory from elephants and rhinos and hippos. And you're trying to change that.
I'm trying to change that. I think that the public overwhelmingly, something like 85%, think that this is a vile trade. Like you, they don't understand why people would want to do this, but it also is endangering species. And the government, back in 2019, said it. They've done the manifesto. They had a consultation that finished in February 2020. They just need to get onto it. My bill is designed to either get them to adopt that and move forward, or to bring forward their own bill very quickly. Put a stop to this vile trade.
And you suggest that those engaging in it should face up to 7 years in jail.
Well, I think some of this, of course, also is organised crime getting involved in this as well, and that's a concern also with a whole number of areas of transporting dead or live animals and birds around the world. But certainly, I think we ought to up the penalties on this, make very clear this is not acceptable, and actually, I hope, set a benchmark for other countries to follow.
Who does this? Who engages in it? How big a problem is it?
It's a significant problem, and that's why many of the newspapers have been conducting investigation campaigns. Lord Ashcroft, previous Treasurer of the Conservative Party, did an undercover investigation for those who were breeding animals specially to get them up to a stage where people could shoot them, you know, within cages or almost. It is extraordinary that people want to do that. But one thing that obviously they seem to like to do is to bring their trophies back to this country. I don't think we want this. I don't think the public want it.
Now, the Tories did pledge action in 2019, so let's be generous to them. They are committed to it. They have reiterated, the Prime Minister has reiterated his commitment to change. So it might not be tomorrow, but they're going to bring about change.
Well, I'm surprised. I would have thought after that litany of bad news that you've just read, they'd actually want to get some good news out there. And this is something that will be very straightforward, because there isn't any significant opposition that I've noticed in the House of Commons to this. This could go through quite quickly and easily. And there seems to be an awful lot of dither and delay. Prime Minister said to me directly in the House of Commons only a couple of weeks ago he wanted to do it. Well, get on with it. I'm offering him a mechanism. He could get that agreed. It could go into committee. It could be moving rapidly, and it wouldn't be taking up government time. I don't understand why they're not doing it, but my degree's in politics, not psychology.
What actually happens tomorrow then? How do you actually put forward your measure and then MPs have to vote? Is that how it happens, or can the government nod it through if they don't oppose it? Tell us what the process is.
Yes, I mean, this is likely to come. There's several items before it which are likely to have long debates, so it may well be at the end of the session, 2:30, I get up and move the bill. The government can either block it or they can let it go through and go to committee. It's a simple choice for them, and I've been urging them very strongly. You say you agree with this, let this go forward, or else introduce a bill, preferably before Christmas, of your own.
Is there an argument? So it's reported that Environment Minister Lord Zach Goldsmith told a campaigner that the department hoped the government's own bill would be brought to Parliament next spring or summer. Is there an argument that it will actually become law quicker, even if we have to wait a few months for the government to make its own time to introduce these changes?
Not at all. This could now move through. And the problem is it will be with a whole number of other bills. If he's talking about that timescale, that means after the next session of Parliament starts, when there will be a raft of other bills that they will be wanting to bring forward. And if they introduce it or announce it in May or June, that could easily go to May or June of the following year. That's how the parliamentary cycle works. So they could easily be putting it off to 2023. Who knows? We might have had a general election by then.
And how do we compare in terms of hunting trophy legislation compared to sort of comparable countries? Are we behind on this, or actually, if we vote for this tomorrow, would we be a global leader on this?
Well, this is another opportunity, frankly, for the government, and one which I would welcome. I'm not being partisan on that, because today I was with a Conservative MP, pushing this campaign. This goes right the way across parties, and indeed includes ministers as well. They quietly tell me. So we're well advanced as a country. This is an opportunity for us to take a world lead on it, and I think that would be very much welcomed in the country and in Parliament.
Just to return to broader politics, if I may, the government are clearly having a tough time at the moment, and actually they've had quite a series of tough events in the last few months. They've had Owen Paterson, they've had the Prime Minister being criticised for not wearing masks in places like hospitals. Yet the Labour Party doesn't seem to be reaping the rewards of any government chaos. You've still got an awful lot of work to do in your party, haven't you?
Well, we just had a 10% swing to us in Bexley. The opinion polls now are showing us either level pegging or ahead. We've had a long way to come back. We've made a number of changes, but under the previous leadership of Jeremy Corbyn, the public, a very large section of the public, particularly in areas such as those that you used to represent, decided they were not going to have that. And now they're looking at us. The good thing now is they don't rule us out. What we've got to do is move further, and I think this new shadow cabinet that's come in, there's a lot of real outstanding performers there, and I think that is going to be reflected in the opinion polls. But I always thought this was going to be a long haul, but we're certainly making progress on this. And also the issues you just described. What they show is a deep dysfunctionality of government. Even this bill that I'm talking about, simply a decisive government would have said, this is popular, this is right, we want to do it, let's move forward quickly. And yet they don't seem to be able to get their act together. Same with the reaction to COVID, same with how they're handling the economy as well. There is a lack of resolve and a lack of competence right at the heart of this government. Bluntly, it goes to Downing Street and it goes to Boris Johnson.
John Speller, Labour MP for Warley, thank you for coming in the studio, and we'll watch with interest what happens to your private members' bill tomorrow. Thank you. Now, when were you last on your high street? You probably saw a fair few shut shops. I'll be talking to an MP battling to help his local town centre next. That's after the weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. There's some wet weather around for all of us this evening, but for most of the day, much of central and eastern Britain dry and bright this afternoon. But in the west, we'll start to see the cloud thickening with some outbreaks of rain trickling in. This set of weather fronts responsible for that. The remnants of Storm Barra clearing away out into the North Sea. We're left with some cloud across the far northeast from that, and the odd shower across northern Scotland around lunchtime. But it's this next weather front that will bring patchy rain to Northern Ireland, turning damp this afternoon for Wales and southwest England, whereas much of the Midlands, eastern England and the bulk of eastern Scotland dry and bright with some sunshine. Temperatures around about average for the time of year, turning a little milder in the southwest, but it will also be turning breezier and wetter. In fact, we'll all see some rain, I think, through this evening. That rain spreading over the Midlands into eastern England. Could get quite heavy for a time through the late part of the evening across East Anglia and the southeast before that scoots away during the early hours. And then skies start to clear once more, and we're left with a few showers across the west. Will turn quite cold, and as it does so, we could just see things turning a little icy across parts of Scotland. So that's just something to be aware of first thing in the morning. Basically, it's a bright sunny start across much of eastern England and the south, and then we'll see showers developing through the day. Quite a few showers for northwest England, North Wales, Northern Ireland, southwest Scotland. Here the showers will come and go throughout. A few for South Wales, southwest England. The odd one getting further east, but much of eastern England, southern England, dry and fine. Temperatures again around average, but feeling a little colder because there will be a fairly brisk and chilly wind blowing tomorrow. That'll keep blowing in showers across these western areas well into Friday evening, whereas again further east largely dry and clear, and that hint of blue suggesting quite an early frost, leading to a chilly start to the weekend, but it will slowly turn milder. A bit of a mishmash this weekend. Won't rain all weekend, but there will certainly be some around, and it'll be breezy.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Well, many of our shops were struggling even before the pandemic, and if you've been on your local high street lately, you'll know it's seen better days. Romford in Essex is one of many towns up and down the country needing some TLC. The local MP, Conservative Andrew Rosindell, is working to revive Romford, and he joins me now to talk about wider lessons for how we revive our towns. Before we talk high streets, Andrew, you would expect me to ask you about what's going on with COVID at the moment. So next week there will be a vote. We think it's going to be on Tuesday on the introduction of the new measures like COVID passports and working from home. How are you going to vote?
I'll vote against. I voted against all of these lockdowns, all of these restrictions, except the first one. I understand why, when the pandemic hit to begin with, none of us knew what we were facing, and the government was right to take action. Since then, I think that it has been a huge overreaction, and we're not calculating the effects of lockdowns on every other area of our lives, not least on education, on mental health, in terms of the economy. And this latest, I'm puzzled by it, because the evidence isn't there that this new variant is going to be catastrophic. In fact, the evidence so far is the opposite, that it's a mild form of COVID. So why, at this very point, when we're looking forward to Christmas, when businesses are really at their peak in terms of what they need to do for Christmas, to then restrict things? I don't really understand why we're doing it. And so, in all honesty, I have to vote against this. I believe we've got to move on. We've got to get life back to normal again. There's always going to be risks in life. There's always going to be potential viruses that could kill people. I mean, you know, we live in a world where there are risks. But I don't think the risks are so great that we need to keep changing the way we live our lives. We have to, as we do in Britain, we have to keep calm and carry on.
Are you a minority on those Conservative backbenchers?
An increasing larger minority. I think that more and more are thinking like that, to be honest. But we'll see what happens in the vote next week.
Right, let's talk high streets. When we think about our high streets, particularly in towns, people want good shops, bars, maybe a restaurant, cafes. The problem is there's often not that much variety on the high street. Lots of takeaways, for example, charity shops. Is that what your issue is?
Oh, I have a bigger issue than that. That's a really central part of the issue. So I've launched a campaign with my local team to revive Romford. We are a proud Essex market town. We are thrilled to have that wonderful heritage as a town which was originally a staging post by the Romans on the way to Colchester, hence Romford, Roman. We have the River Rom that runs through, which has been sadly neglected. We have a wonderful market, which has sadly been neglected. We have a town centre which used to be really one of the premier shopping centres in Essex and the east side of London. But it's not been looked after in the way that it should have been. And there is so much more we need to do. But our problem, I think, is that we're caught between two, so we're part of Greater London. We never wanted to be part of Greater London. In fact, we voted against having a Mayor of London being part of the GLA. But we pay a lot of money into London. We get very little back in terms of police cover, in terms of investment. So I want to see a bit of reform here. I want levelling up in areas like Romford. And I know some people say, well, actually, you're in the south of England, you don't need it. But actually, when you consider we pay a much higher council tax than, say, Westminster, yet we get not nearly as good services, I think there's something going wrong here. So fundamental reform is needed.
Now, new work from home guidance, you're going to be voting against it, but is there an argument, actually, that can boost our local high streets? It stops people going near their workplaces in big city centres and keeps them local.
By working from home? Yeah, clearly there's going to be some changes. If people are more at home, they're going to use local town centres. So, and I think that although I'm not generally in favour of people working from home, I think people should get to work and get on with life. I do think that the consequence of the pandemic is that there's going to be more of a balance with this. I think more people will work from home. And I do hope that will help to revive our town centres, because when you go to some areas, you can see how they're being allowed to sort of be run down. And I think that we need to level up in all areas of the country. But then I worry about central London too, because we're losing, I think a lot of businesses in central London are going to struggle.
Now, Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, Labour's Chancellor, said she would freeze business rates if she was the Chancellor, while also offering a cut for small firms, paid for by hiking digital taxes. She basically committed the next Labour government to abolishing business rates. That would help the high street, wouldn't it?
Well, I don't know if there's going to be a next Labour government, Gloria. Who knows? We'll see. But if there is, it's the kind of policy that I think that I'd be very sympathetic to. I would like to see business rates got rid of, to be honest, and a new system put in place. I'm not saying that businesses should not contribute to the cost of the local services that they are using, but I do think they're being clobbered unfairly, and I think a lot of small businesses really can't afford these high rates of local business rates that they're paying, and they're not getting any service for it. So there does need to be reform of this. So I actually have sympathy with freezing, get rid of it altogether, really. Without business, without enterprise, particularly small business, and Romford is full of market traders, shopkeepers, small businesses. Without them, they're really the motor for our economy, and they're the provider of jobs, and we need that strong enterprise culture in towns like Romford. So I do sympathise with this policy. I'll let Rishi know and see if he can put that in his next budget.
It's always a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Gloria.
On GB News. Thank you for coming in. Andrew ROSINDELL MP for Romford. Thank you.
Great to be here.
Coming up shortly, I'm talking to the MP wanting us to go greener, quicker, and I'll have an exclusive interview with the flamboyant Conservative MP, Michael Fabricant. You'll enjoy it, I promise. But first, it's the news.
I'm Olivia Guthrie. Here are the latest headlines. The Cabinet Secretary will now investigate 3 alleged parties in Downing Street and Whitehall during lockdown last year. Cabinet Minister Michael Ellis says they're looking into several claims. He also says the Cabinet Office will liaise with police if anything illegal is uncovered. The investigation follows a leaked video showing Number 10 staff laughing about breaking restrictions just days after one of the alleged events. Boris Johnson is facing a revolt from Tory backbenchers who are questioning the government's credibility in enforcing England's Plan B COVID rules. New restrictions include extending mandatory masks to indoor public venues such as cinemas and theatres, and guidance to work from home where possible will return on Monday. Boris Johnson is also facing renewed questions into a donation used to pay for the redecoration of his Downing Street flat. Deputy Labour leader Angela Rayner has accused the Prime Minister of lying when he says he doesn't know who was behind the payment. The Electoral Commission has fined the Tories £17,800. A party spokesperson says they're considering an appeal. Meanwhile, Boris Johnson and his wife Carrie have announced the birth of a baby girl at a London hospital earlier today. It's the couple's second child after the birth of their son Wilfred in April 2020. A spokeswoman for the couple said both mother and daughter are doing very well. You're right up to date. I'll be back with more news later.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
So the world is getting hotter, but there's not much agreement about what to do about it, and some think we're going much too slowly in our transition to a new green economy. Well, Colum Eastwood, leader of Northern Ireland's SDLP, is bringing a bill before Parliament tomorrow which calls for tougher, faster action. He joins me in the studio now. Before we talk about your bill, can I just ask you about the vote on vaccine passports, which we think is going to happen next Tuesday? Will you be voting for the introduction of vaccine passports?
Well, I won't vote actually because it's England only, but I had proposed in Northern Ireland 3 months ago, even stricter measures actually, where we now have vaccine passports for people entering pubs. And what we saw there was about 10,000 people in Northern Ireland, which is a small place, over a couple of days got their first vaccine as soon as that was announced. So the impact actually happened. People got out and got their vaccine. So there weren't that many people who were sort of ideologically opposed to getting a vaccine. They just hadn't got round to it. And asking them to show a very simple app that they would need to get into a venue or a pub, I think it's not that big a burden, and it gets more people vaccinated. It means that everybody in that pub can feel safer, actually, because they know that everybody else is vaccinated or has had a negative lateral flow test. I think it's sensible. I actually think these measures that the government announced yesterday are fairly minimal. Might not have the impact that they want to have, and really are probably more to do with what's going on within the Tory party and the parties in Downing Street than anything really to do with Omicron or anything else.
Interesting. Let's look at the law you want to introduce tomorrow. You want to place a duty on government ministers to bring forward proposals for a corporate green levy on large businesses. Just explain that for us.
Well, we know that climate change is happening now. I don't think there's really any debate about that anymore. And I think COP26 was a big disappointment for many people. A lot of talk, a lot of blah, 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 and not very much impact on the ground. But what we're seeing, if we look at this now, if we keep going the way we're going, if we hit 3 degrees, just 3 degrees in terms of warming, that'll be 275 million people across the world whose homes will be underwater. I mean, and that's where we're headed if we don't act, and act radically and urgently. Now, if people worry about immigration issues today, what it's going to be like if we have 275 million people who are homeless and have to migrate somewhere else. This is a huge issue for all of us, and it has to be tackled. So that's why I think the government need to go further and faster. And I really believe, actually, that large companies should bear a greater burden than individual people out there, like working class people who have suffered enough, who are struggling with higher fuel costs, and all of those things shouldn't have the burden placed upon them. It should be governments and large companies who have to pay for this, what is going to have to be a very radical transition to tackle this huge issue.
But you talk about fuel bills. Businesses are having to pay higher fuel bills as well, and you want to whack them with another tax.
No, when I'm not talking about small businesses or medium, I'm talking about huge, big, large businesses who are contributing, actually, and have contributed to this climate catastrophe that we're entering into. So I think that's where the burden should be. It shouldn't be on the ordinary man and woman on the street. It should be on governments and large companies who have got us into this difficulty. It's important that everybody recycles and puts their plastic bottles in the right bin and all of that, but that's not going to sort this problem out. It is huge radical action by governments and large companies that will sort it out.
Now, there are some people who think, actually, the government are doing too much on this agenda, that they'd rather them focus on the bread and butter issues. The Committee on Climate Change, a group of experts that advises the government, says their net zero strategy is ambitious and comprehensive, but you want them to go further.
Well, it just isn't ambitious enough. As I've said already, if we keep doing what we're doing, we could hit 4 degrees. But if we only get to 3 degrees, we need to get to 1.5. That's what everybody agrees is the right number. But if we only get to 3 degrees, people talk about bread and butter issues. What are we going to do if there's 275 million people with nowhere to live? They're going to come here. That is going to put a massive burden on the health service and all the law and order and everything else. So these people who don't want to talk about this issue, it's fine. You can put your hands in your ears if you want and close your eyes. This is happening right now. Therefore, we have to act right now. And I think it will be a huge shame if this generation don't deal with the problems that were given to us by previous generations, but we can't in all good conscience say to our children and grandchildren, we had a chance to deal with this and we just didn't bother.
Finally, we noticed on your Twitter yesterday that you called on Boris Johnson to resign over the various Christmas parties that have allegedly been held.
Yeah.
It clearly isn't going to. Shouldn't you save your calls for resignations for when you've got a chance of letting it happen?
Well, let's see. I mean, I'm very reluctant to call for people to resign, and I don't do it very often. But I genuinely think if we're heading into, and we've been through a pandemic for 2 years, and we've all these problems stacking up, if the person in charge of asking us to do hard things isn't prepared to do them for himself, how can we have any faith in him? I think he's lost the trust of the public, and I think he's in real trouble, actually, politically. And we'll see where that goes, but I would not be surprised if Boris Johnson's days are numbered.
Thank you so much. Very interesting to talk to you. Thank you for coming to the studio, and I'm sure we'll speak to you again. Now, it's time for my latest Real Me interview, where we go behind the politics and get to know the real person. Conservative MP Michael Fabricant is in spectacular form. You're in for a real treat. Michael Fabricant, let's start at the beginning. What did your mum and dad do?
Well, my mum was a housewife, but my dad, well, he started off as an academic and had done foreign languages, and then he served in army intelligence in the Second World War. But then, because of what he saw, strangely in my view, he became a rabbi because he was Jewish. My mother was of Welsh Jewish origin. And he sort of felt that, I mean, actually, if I'd have seen what he'd seen, because he had to interrogate, if you like, German prisoners of war, I think I would have become a complete atheist. But anyway, it made him more religious. And so I was brought up in a Jewish family.
Do you have faith?
I have faith in a lot of things, but I'm not a deeply religious person, though I'm very interested in religion. I live very close to Lichfield Cathedral, and I like the music, I like the tradition. I don't believe in the Trinity, but you know, the great thing about Anglicanism is you can believe in as much or as little as you like. I like spirituality, I suppose. I don't know, actually. I mean, basically, I'm an agnostic. I haven't got a clue whether there's a God or not. But what I do believe is if you're decent to other human beings, if there is a God, that's how he'll judge you, not whether how you worship him.
You were elected in 1992, but tell me about your working life ahead of your election.
Well, while I was at university, I was in broadcasting and I worked on Radio 4 doing various programmes. And I did a teeny bit of television, but I think I must have a face for radio because I did more successfully there. And then I got thrown out of the BBC because I decided to get a consortium together. This was all while I was at university, to apply for a commercial radio station, which we got to serve Sussex, Southern Sound. And we got this license from the old Independent Broadcasting Authority, as it was known as then. And we couldn't find any decent equipment to go into our radio station. So I went into partnership with a guy I'd met at the BBC, who was an engineer, and we set up a company to make broadcasting equipment and install it at radio stations. And we did that in 48 different countries around the world, and I travelled to most of them. So it was a very, very exciting period for me.
What was the most memorable country you worked in?
Well, that's hard because I was in countries, Australia, the United States, also in Africa. But I think the most exciting one, because of the time that I was there, was the Soviet Union. Because I was there a lot during the transition between it becoming the Soviet Union and then becoming Russia. And I remember once I was with a guy called Boris Viktorovich Nekrasov, who was head of radio studio planning at Radio Moscow. And it was May Day, and we were watching the parade as it was beginning to go or heading into Red Square. And a policeman, a militiaman, came up to us and said, you can't stay on the sidewalk, on the pavement. And Boris said, what do you mean we can't stay on the sidewalk? He says, well, that's my orders, he said. So Boris says, well, can we join them? So we joined them. And I joined. What it was a protest group which was behind the military parade. And they were flying the Lithuanian, Latvian, and Estonian flags when it was illegal because they were then Soviet socialist republics. And I got chatting to one guy who was, I always remember, was a ginger-haired, blue-eyed guy who said, I said, why are you protesting? And he said, well, I'm Jewish, which I didn't look Jewish to me, but he said, I'm Jewish. And he said, in my internal passport in the Soviet Union, it doesn't say I'm Lithuanian or Russian, it says Ivri, which is Jewish in Russian, as if it's a nationality, when in fact it's a religion. And of course, there's a great difference between nationality and religion, whatever the religion might be. Anyway, we marched into Red Square, and I remember Mikhail Gorbachev being on the top of the Lenin Mausoleum with other members of the Politburo. And suddenly everyone started shouting, Daloi, KGB, Daloi, down with the KGB. And Boris was saying, this is looking ugly. And we're standing there in Red Square with all this happening. And Gorbachev was saying, calm down, and everyone was ignoring him. And Boris was saying, this is incredible. I mean, this would never normally happen. And then we noticed KGB guys pulling cables out of the scanner truck. Now, the scanner is the truck which does all the camera mixing, because all of this was being beamed out throughout the whole Soviet Union, and they were pulling the cables out to try and take it off air. And Tiananmen Square had only happened a short time earlier. And Boris said to me, something terrible might happen now, so just get prepared to drop to the floor. But nothing happened. I remember Gorbachev shrugged, and they walked off the podium, and Boris turned to me of the end of the Soviet Union. So I witnessed that little bit of history.
Have you always been a Conservative? Voted Conservative?
Probably, but I must say that if I'd not been an MP, because as you say, I got elected in '92, I might have voted for Tony Blair. I was quite shocked, actually, because I lived in Brighton, which is a very cosmopolitan place. And I got into the House of Commons in '92, and I found the Conservative Party was very different from the Conservative Party that I knew down in Brighton. All retired colonel types, very, very pompous, and quite sort of misogynist, homophobic, xenophobic, and every other phobic you can think of. So I thought at the time that Tony Blair was quite refreshing. But by then I was a Conservative MP, so I thought I'd better vote for myself, otherwise I might lose. So I voted for myself in '97.
Now, when I was doing my research, I noticed that you're often described as a close friend of West Midlands Mayor Andy Street. What does that mean? What's the nature of your relationship?
Well, Andy and I met 31 years ago. I had gone back to a Geordie at Oxford University, and I met him there. A reunion at Oxford. And he was there. He's 13 years younger than me, so he was at Oxford. And we sort of met up and became great friends. And, you know, we've got a place together in Wales because we both like walking. We go on holidays together and we're very, very close. But we lead separate lives. If we lived together all the time, I think we'd murder each other. So, you know, people sometimes think we're joined at the hip. We're not, but we're very, very close friends. And we know that we can depend on each other. And it's very strange, actually, when I think about it. When I met him, I lived in Brighton and was in broadcasting. And he lived in London and was born in Birmingham, or was brought up in Birmingham anyway, and worked in retail, subsequently to become the chief executive of John Lewis and Waitrose. And now I'm the MP in Lichfield in the West Midlands, and he's now a political guy, the West Midlands mayor. It's extraordinary, actually, how our lives have sort of come together.
Is he your partner?
We're life partners. We're something special, but I'm not quite sure what it is. One of those indefinable little things.
What would he say if I asked him if you were his partner?
He would cringe with embarrassment. He would take the microphone off and storm off the set. A bit like John Knott, if you remember, when he was being interviewed about the Falklands War.
Now, you did First Dates for charity. That's a reality TV programme for charity. So you weren't looking for love on that?
I wasn't looking for love, no. It was... they wanted me to go with a guy. They wanted to pair me... Well, I think they'd assumed I was gay, because people do assume that. I'm not gay, actually. I mean, when I was at... I'm bisexual, I suppose, if you've got to define these things, because when I was at university and after university, I was with women, and sexually I'm far more, or was far more active with women than I ever have been with blokes, if I'm honest. But we probably won't go into detail because I believe this is going to be broadcast at a family time of day.
I think the world has moved on and everyone recognised that love is love.
Right. Well, anyways, cut a long story short, all the women I was with, they wanted to get married, they wanted babies, they wanted mortgages, they wanted commitment.
You should have met me, Michael. It would have been fine.
We probably would have been, actually. But, you know, I was sort of setting up a radio company, as I said, travelling all around the world and all the rest of it. I didn't want commitment. And, you know, and then I met an American guy, and then subsequently I met Andy. And, you know, we both lead, as I said just now, busy lives. We're there for each other, but it does mean I can get on with being, nowadays, an MP, and he can get on with being West Midlands mayor, and we're not constantly worrying about each other and all the rest of it.
Will you spend Christmas Day together?
We will, actually. We're going to spend Christmas Day with his dad and with his sister, Catherine, who's coming over from Newfoundland. So where we go every year, well, we did go every year before COVID. So it's going to be fun. And we're going to do it at our place in Wales. But often we don't do that. It just happens to be this year we're doing it. It's a good question.
It came to me. So at the time of recording, there's lots of questions. Well, I mean, the government has announced its drugs policy, but at the same time, there's questions about drugs in Parliament. I have to say, I never heard, were witness to it
well,
or
let
any
me
of
tell
that.
you something. The only time I've ever heard about it was recently. So I, because of my former background, have many friends in the theatre and the entertainment industry, as they say. Stephen Fry, some years ago, came to dinner with me. And I subsequently read in the book that he'd written that he was so bored with our conversation at one point that he meandered off to the Lord's loo to snort a line of coke.
Because you were boring him, Michael.
Because I think I was boring him at this stage.
Turning people to hard drug use.
It was back in the 1990s. I think nowadays he doesn't. But honestly, I mean, I didn't witness that. And, you know, I smoked the odd spliff when I was at university and also when I was in New York doing the radio stuff in my 30s. But frankly, a gin and tonic has the same effect. I've never gone in for chemicals. I've got an interest in medicine, and the idea of sort of using chemicals which aren't properly purified, you just wonder what on earth you'd be snorting. So cocaine is not my particular thing. Though I do remember, actually, when I first became an MP, the whips thought I was so lively. Apparently they thought I was on drugs, because they were so pompous, as I said earlier, and so dour, and so retired colonel, and, you know, I had this long hair and everything, and they couldn't believe that I could be naturally like this. And can I just assure, I'm going to look at a camera, I'm going to assure GB News viewers at the moment, I'm not on drugs, believe me. Sorry about that, Pierre. They'll probably edit that bit out.
How difficult is it, finally, to be a character in Westminster on the green benches? You're not buttoned up, you're a character.
Well, as I think some people might say, I find it only too easy. No, I don't feel inhibited. I think when I first got into the House of Commons, I felt very inhibited. I tried to hold myself back all the time. But, you know, when I sort of won Lichfield with a notional majority, because they changed the boundaries, with about 4,000. And in 1997, when I did decide to vote for myself and not for Tony Blair, I won with a majority of only 238, which I didn't think was that good. But others said to me, Michael, there were MPs with 16,000, 18,000 majorities losing.
True.
And people began to say, Michael, you've got great personality, be yourself. And I found it much easier in the parliamentary party from 97 onwards. We were a small band of brothers on the opposition benches. But actually, it was great fun, and people, I think, respected the fact that I was electable.
Illuminating, revealing, entertaining.
Too revealing.
Perfectly revealing. Michael Fabricant, thank you.
Thank you.
And Michael, if you're watching, sorry that I stole your pen. I will get it back to you. You've been watching The Briefing with me, Gloria De Piero. The show is back every weekday from noon. Up next, it's On the Money with Liam Halligan. I'll be back with Liam at 2. But for now, it's time for your weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. There's some wet weather around for all of us this evening, but for most of the day, much of central and eastern Britain dry and bright this afternoon. But in the west, we'll start to see the cloud thickening with some outbreaks of rain trickling in. This set of weather fronts responsible for that. The remnants of Storm Barra clearing away out into the North Sea. We're left with some cloud across the far northeast from that and the odd shower across northern Scotland around lunchtime. But it's this next weather front that will bring patchy rain to Northern Ireland, turning damp this afternoon for Wales and southwest England, whereas much of the Midlands, eastern England and the bulk of eastern Scotland dry and bright with some sunshine. Temperatures around about average for the time of year, turning a little milder in the southwest, but it will also be turning breezier and wetter. In fact, we'll all see some rain, I think, through this evening. That rain spreading over the Midlands into eastern England. Could get quite heavy for a time through the late part of the evening across East Anglia and the southeast before that scoots away during the early hours. And then skies start to clear once more and we're left with a few showers across the west. Will turn quite cold, and as it does so, we could just see things turning a little icy across parts of Scotland. So that's just something to be aware of first thing in the morning. Basically, it's a bright sunny start across much of eastern England and the south, and then we'll see showers developing through the day. Quite a few showers for northwest England, North Wales, Northern Ireland, southwest Scotland. Here the showers will come and go throughout. A few for South Wales, southwest England. The odd one getting further east, but much of eastern England, southern England, dry and fine. Temperatures again around average, but feeling a little colder because there will be a fairly brisk and chilly wind blowing tomorrow. That'll keep blowing in showers across these western areas well into Friday evening, whereas again further east largely dry and clear, and that hint of blue suggesting quite an early frost, leading to a chilly start to the weekend, but it will slowly turn milder. A bit of a mishmash this weekend. Won't rain all weekend, but there will certainly be some around, and it'll be breezy.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube